Marcel. Il était une fois un mari jaloux qui fit condamner à mort son épouse innocente. Elle s'appelait Geneviève de Brabant, et les serviteurs chargés de l'égorger dans une sombre forêt prirent pitié de la malheureuse. Ils lui laissèrent la vie sauve. Quelques années plus tard, le comte Siegfried la découvrit endormie au creux d'un arbre.
Je vous gêne peut-être? Vous voulez que j'arrête?
The little boy is using exactly the toy that's described, and Proust asks us quite directly in the text, and certainly our director Ruiz does it even more directly here. When we remember things, do we actually access the past, what has happened to us, or, using a little bit of a pun, do we simply project them? So there was a dinner party, and the little boy is never invited to it. He always has to go to bed early. Is the dinner party that took place something we could ever access again? Of course not. The little boy isn't even at it. But he asks us whether actually even the things he knows personally, like lying in bed waiting on his mother's kiss, are those also projections? At the core of the story is a terrible tragedy, not the tragedy you get in Hamlet or even the tragedy you get in Pushkin. There's the tragedy of the mother's kiss coming too late, being too brief, and then being over. At the top of 2687, we get this core element. Proust says, my sole consolation when I went upstairs for the night was Maman would come in and kiss me and after I was in bed. But this good night lasted for so short a time, she went down again so soon, that the moment in which I heard her climb the stairs and then caught the sound of her garden dress of blue muslin from which hung little tassels of plaited straw, rustling along the double-doored corridor, for me a moment of the utmost pain, for it heralded the moment which was bound to follow it. So there are a couple of things I invite you to think about. One of them actually has to do with childhood. The narrator, the little boy, or at least the little boy as his adult self remembers him, is very, very sad, lonely, in pain, suffering from isolation and from depression. Are children like that? People like to imagine childhood as happy. Proust gives us an image of childhood that is quite unhappy and isolated. The child understands much more, perhaps, than we would have given him credit for, and therefore suffers far more. So that's the first thought. And the second thought is the obsession with the mother just a little too intense, a little too extreme? And who are we to judge one way or the other? All of the other characters, apart from the mother, are presented quite negatively. There's a lot of critique of journalism, of snobism, of how habituated everybody gets to get into a rut and so forth. But in the case of the mother, there's this huge preoccupation and a great tension with the father who thinks it's really not adult. Perhaps it's not masculine enough for the little boy to want the kiss so badly. On 2698, looking at his mother, he says, he almost obsesses around her, saying, I never took my eyes off my mother. I would carefully choose in advance the exact spot on her cheek where I would imprint the kiss, and would so prepare my thoughts as to be able, thanks to these mental preliminaries, to consecrate the whole of the minute Maman would grant me to the sensation of her cheek against my lips. As a painter who can have his subject for short sittings only prepares his palette, and for what he remembers and from rough notes does in advance everything which he possibly can do in the sitter's absence. And after this intense artistic relationship to kissing his mother, all his dad can do is say, run off. You've been too long at this. You need to stop. Proust creates beautiful images of remembering childhood loneliness and pain. But in some ways we feel disappointed, or at least he invites us to feel disappointed with any of those memories ever being more than projections. I'm just giving you two famous images here of the kind of fantastical painting that was fashionable in the period. Images of the Greek mythological character of Orpheus done in pastels, which maybe you were given as a child to play with. Apparitions and hallucinations appearing out of biblical stories like Gustave Moreau's Apparition. So I want just to ask you a little bit about the ending of the text. I think I'll leave out that last film clip. It's from Dark City about what would happen if somehow your memories were changed on you. If you couldn't remember who you are, would you be you? So He expresses disappointment on 2705. He keeps saying it's getting harder and harder to remember things. I can't remember. And every time I try to remember something, it doesn't come to me properly. There's an echo of what happened, but it never fully materializes. But Proust is going to have a particular moment, and it's the single most important and most famous element of this particular text. And that has to do with when he almost manages to recollect, and then he does. And it doesn't have to do with looking at a painting. It doesn't have to do with overthinking it. It's for a very specific reason that he can remember. On 2710, he says, I stay up late at night and I just can't remember being a child. And so it was that for a long time afterwards, when I lay awake at night and revived old memories of Cambrai, where he used to spend his summer vacation, I saw no more of it than this sort of luminous panel, sharply defined against a vague and shadowy background, like the panels which glow in a Bengal light. So another one of these projection objects that are fashionable in play, in the text. And he says it doesn't work because it's voluntary memory. I try to remember, and the more I concentrate, the more I fail. And then he sits down in a cafe one day and just orders his favorite childhood tea, the exact equivalent of chocolate chip cookies and a glass of milk in France. It's Madeleine, these little biscuits, and that's the recipe that you'll get later. It's Madeleine and a cup of herbal tea, a tisane. This is what you're given as a kid all the time to eat. So it just happens, I'll just do something old school. And he decides he's going to eat this. At the bottom of 2711, he says this: an exquisite pleasure had invaded my senses, something isolated, detached, with no suggestion of its origin. On 2713, and suddenly the memory revealed itself. A little further down, but when from a long distant past nothing subsists, after the people are dead, after the things are broken and scattered, taste and smell alone, more fragile but more enduring, more unsubstantial, more persistent, more faithful, remain poised a long time, like souls remembering, waiting, hoping amid the ruins of all the rest, and bear unflinchingly in the tiny and almost impalpable drop of their essence the vast structure of recollection. And as soon as I recognized the taste of the piece of Madeleine soaked in lime blossoms which my aunt used to give me, immediately the old grey house upon the street where her room was rose up like a stage set to attach itself to the little pavilion opening onto the garden which had been built out of it behind for my parents. So actually, of course, it's medically true that some of the best ways that we recollect things are through taste and smell, which are in fact very closely, if not identical, senses. But Proust says all of this intellectual, all of this yearning, all of this desire for things that we do not have, most and perhaps first and foremost for the past, it gets you nothing. But when you're surprised and involuntarily you're given something that triggers a memory, then suddenly it can come back to you. So one last anecdote, and I invite you to think of personal anecdotes of how memory has surprisingly come to you. So when my grandmother died, and of course we have a lot of loss at the moment, so this seems to me to be an appropriate anecdote. When my grandmother died, none of my family in New Orleans were interested in keeping her furniture, but I was a young assistant professor, and my husband and I had nothing, so we were super into it, and we really liked the style. So it was delivered to us in the middle of the summer, Texas summer, in July, and it was probably 120 degrees outside. So we wrestled all of this furniture into the house, and it really didn't fit because our house was too small, and it was old-fashioned, just like the furniture in Proust's apartment. We got it, and it's like, fine, never want to even look at it again. It was a big dresser that she had in her bedroom that we put in the guest bedroom. I didn't think about it, didn't look at it, not for a while. I actually kind of resented it because we nearly killed ourselves trying to move this piece. And then by chance, I want to say 4 or 5 months later, sometime in the fall, I opened one of the drawers. And I really cared for my grandmother. She was an amazing person. But I also realized it had only been 7 or 8 months since she'd passed away, that there was a way in which parts of her were not as clear to me as they'd been right after her death, or certainly when she was still alive. And I opened the drawer, and she was a very old-fashioned French lady, and she wore a particular type of powder that had a slight floral scent to it. And when I opened the drawer, I could smell her powder. And that little bit of aroma, it lingers on that bureau. It's still there. And every time that I open it, just to like get paper out of it or something, I smell for a second what my grandmother used to be like in person. Well, I'm not sure that I will have sold you fully on Proust. It is long, it is slow, like the Ed Sheeran song, like the Woody Allen clip. but it invites you to think about how one might present the very ordinary so that it is extraordinary. And it invites you to reflect on how memories are made, not just exist, but how they're made, how we actively create them. So I'll make a last slide. Since we're all in, if you want to cook something and you're not, probably there's a gluten-free way of doing this as well, and you're not allergic to any of the ingredients, I hugely recommend. You have to have a cute special little tin if you want them to come out in the little hat shape that's traditional, but actually a mini cupcake tin will do well. So whether you decide to make yourself madeleines or not, maybe you're just going to enjoy them conceptually rather than literally. I hope you have a safe and healthy start to the week, and I'll connect with you later. All the best. Bye.